Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to you. You're watching another episode of Encounter. Today in the studios of the NBC, we have Helina Hookoomsing, who is a meditation teacher. She's also a Reiki healer and a woman circle facilitator. But the reason why she's here today is to speak about holistic education. Helina, a very warm welcome to you and thank you for being here with us.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Helina, you seem to be very good at many things, but professionally, you work at the Mauritius Institute of Education since some 10 years, and you specialize in the coaching and training of educators.
Yes, that's right. So I've been in teacher education for over 10 years, and I specialize in teaching drama as a performance art and also in English. And I've trained educators from pre-primary sector, primary level and secondary for a variety of different courses ranging from certificates and diplomas and graduate levels. And definitely my passions and visions in relation to healing and meditation have been infused into my practice, my professional practice for a number of years now, and starting to see the benefits with a number of trainees and educators is always something that's very encouraging, to have that feedback, to see the progress that they make, to see the enthusiasm that they have to learn these things, and for finding ways that it can be integrated really, really easily, really simply into their day-to-day lives. And that's the whole purpose of meditation, for it not to feel like it's something you have to carve out time for, like it's a special activity, but something that is easy to integrate every day as part of your routine, and it becomes something that is sustainable and long-lasting.
And during our conversation before this recording, you mentioned that you infuse meditation and mindfulness in the way you train educators. And it is something that you started to do some 4 years ago. And I would like to remind our viewers that whatever will be discussed going forward does not only apply to teachers and educators. It also applies to parents, but also to students who are studying and who will benefit from the tips that will be shared during this interview. So there are so many questions, but let's start from how did you come about to start implementing meditation in your way of teaching?
It was a personal journey of self-discovery, and having experienced a number of meditation sessions myself, having been quite stressed, quite filled with anxiety in my own life, I came across meditation as an activity that I thought, well, give it a go, see how it helps. And it was so helpful for me personally that it really inspired me that I could go on and try to help others. So I went forward with my training. I've also followed courses with the Oxford Mindfulness Centre, which is a centre attached to the University of Oxford, and they specialise in mindfulness-based trainings. And I use those experiences and the learning that I went through to say to myself, well, let me try with others. Let's see if this can possibly help to alleviate some of the stress and the anxiety that I feel or that I've heard from people around me, professionally or personally. And it started off personally at first with a small group of friends and people that I know, and they loved it so much and they could really feel the benefits of it that I thought, let me also put it into practice in my workplace. And in my workplace, I've integrated it in my teaching. I've also led a small funded research project at the institution, which yielded some very interesting and very valuable insights. And for a time period, I was also carrying out lunchtime sessions for all the staff so that they could come and they could sit and they could have a moment, 30 minutes or so, just of relaxation, centering themselves, self-regulating. And it was always met with such a positive response. Yep. Each and every time. Some curiosity, some questions that people have that you want clarification, but the positive feedback was always something that urged me to continue.
So that's from where you got your motivation, I'm guessing. Would it be extreme to say that at some point you were also probably dealing with some very difficult phases in your life and it affected you mentally? Were you struggling with mental health at some point?
I think for me, stress was something that was affecting me very much.
I think we all suffer from mental health at some point. It's an upward and downward. It's all how we react to it.
Absolutely.
And everyone goes through it. And from what I understand is meditation and mindfulness helped you a lot along with the Reiki and all the other things that you've done.
Yeah, it definitely did. And I would agree that each person, I think, at some point in our lives or some episode in our lives, there is something we're struggling with emotionally or mentally. And the ways that we can use meditation and mindfulness really as tools, they equip us with tools that can help us to alleviate some of that pain, some of that stress. And there's a lot of research that's being done about that also. I think for many people, when they hear about meditation, it seems so esoteric or intangible.
Yep.
What really are the benefits of this? It can seem a little bit kooky to people as well. But nowadays, there are major research projects that are being done, especially in areas like mindfulness-based stress reduction, mindfulness-based cognitive therapies, a number of higher education institutions, a number of school-level programs that are being implemented with really thorough, rigorous research approaches that yield data to show the benefits and how helpful it can be for young people, for adolescents, for children, and for adults alike.
Oh, fantastic. Well, Helina, I hope you'll be sharing with us some tips on how we can indulge more in the mindfulness and meditation for holistic education. But in the meantime, I'll also invite the viewers to have a look at this following report on holistic education. Following the trend of globalization, we live in a fragmented and alienated world. Many young people and adolescents suffer from depression, negative emotions, and low attention span in this age of multitasking and distractions. In the past decades, mindfulness, that is a meditation skill, has been broadly adapted and implemented as an effective healing tool to address stress, depression, and negative emotions in hospitals, corporations, professional sports, and even prisons in the West. A growing number of scientific researchers have shown that incorporating mindfulness into daily life is significant in benefiting health, relaxation, attention span, social relationships, and creating a sense of well-being. Within this context, it is evident that mindfulness practice is helpful in enhancing the academic performance of students through a holistic approach by developing the skills of emotional, bodily, and interpersonal awareness. Curriculum design and leadership training incorporating mindfulness for learning in different ways have been adapted in tertiary institutions, secondary, and primary schools. Mindfulness in holistic education promotes holistic learning, spirituality, well-being, intuitive knowing, mind, body, spirit, and relationships by reconnecting children to the world. Mindful education has experienced unprecedented growth over the last decade. Mindful programs for students of all ages have been embraced by schools across the globe. Mindful education programs that provide long-lasting and real benefits to children need to be robust, well-developed, and flexible. They should be human-centered and based on sound pedagogical principles and facilitated by teachers with appropriate training, creative ability, and commitment to a personal practice of mindfulness. Welcome back. You're still watching Encounter, and Helina is still with us in the studio. Before we watched the report, you were mentioning that there are many researches that have been carried out on holistic education. Can you share with us what have been one of the main findings that have happened, that have come out, and when you compare it to the way people were being educated before, especially the impact on children nowadays?
Yes, so before I was mentioning specifically research related to mindfulness and meditation, but when it comes to holistic education, there really has been a gain in momentum for holistic education in the local educational landscape. Taking a holistic approach to education is a way to really put a fundamental objective of educating the person as a whole. And what do we mean by educating the person as a whole? There is a researcher and an author called Ron Miller who says that when we talk about the whole person, we're talking about the intellectual, the emotional, the social, the aesthetic, and in many ways, and secular ways, the spiritual person as well. So all the aspects of an individual.
EQ, IQ, SQ, and
All of it, the cognitive, the affective, the psychomotor. We really think about what it means to be this complex being living in a complex world. And how do we develop sense of self-awareness, interpersonal awareness? How do we develop a sense of ourselves positioned within our communities?
a sense of responsibility also. An
Responsibility.
enhanced state of responsibility that
Yeah.
eventually happens.
Yeah, responsibility and also interconnectedness. So when we talk about that secular notion of spirituality, it's a spirituality that is beyond the physical being or the social being or these other ways that we define our personality, but really looking at the core essence of our interrelatedness. How do we build sense of responsibility, compassion, this notion of unconditional love, empathy, and respect as well.
Would it be okay to say that the shift has moved from the individual focus to a broader focus where there's not only us or one person, because we're all living as a group in society, and it's better to enhance the interconnectedness?
Yes, very much so. I mean, at the heart of holistic education is this term holism. And holism as a philosophy really takes from indigenous worldviews, perennial philosophies. It takes from this notion that we are all connected, and we are all connected not only in terms of this land and this earth, but in the greater cosmos sense of things. And while that can be very abstract for many people to understand, at the heart of it, it's recognizing that I cannot survive on my own. I am a social being, and as humanity, we cannot survive on our own. We survive in harmony with other species and with the land and the sea and the sky. And that may not necessarily always be something that people are consciously aware of or take into consideration. But when we think about holistic education, it's something that is put forward to help us really shift from the current trend of, let's say, global climate change and pollution and destruction of the environment towards slowly rebuilding our harmonious connections with others and to finding balance in the world once again.
More sustainable initiatives.
Very much so.
So, Helina, to the teachers that you have trained, to our viewers at home, and also probably people from the younger generation who are studying or who know people who will be going through exams soon, or just as a general approach in life, what would be the first tip you would share with them?
So my first tip, I would say, for meditation, it's something that's accessible for all people. It is for everyone who wants to. And it's this notion that you do not need to come to meditation thinking, I need to clear my mind of all thoughts. It needs to be an absence of thoughts. I need to find that stillness inside of me. It's so fundamentally difficult, if not impossible, unless we've reached complete levels of Zen. Because the mind is always thinking. The mind is meant to be thinking, just as though we don't question why our heart beats or our lungs breathe. The mind will always have thoughts that come and go. And the biggest tip I give is to approach any meditation practice as though you are the non-judgmental, compassionate observer of your thoughts.
Can you please define that a bit? Or can we have an experience now and teach me how to do that?
For example, having a little bit of detachment from our thoughts gives us the space to recognize that our thoughts are changing, our mental states are changing. We often have that saying that the only constant is change.
Yeah.
And it's the same with our thoughts. We have a lot of mind clutter and clatter that can dominate. But when we learn to engage in meditation and mindfulness, we realize we do not need to identify as our thoughts. We do not need to attach ourselves to them for longer than necessary. They can come and they can go, and our emotions and our states of being can change at the same time. One practice that I really like to do is encouraging people to mind your thoughts. So what you would do there is ask yourself, well, what am I thinking right now? Does this thought have a shape? When I think, is it mostly in pictures? Is it mostly in words? And once I've started understanding that, I take a pause and I say, well, what is the next thought that is coming up for me right now? And again, asking, does it have more colors, more pictures, more words? And we start to look at it from a slightly distanced perspective, a slightly more objective perspective. We start to ask ourselves, does that thought have a resonance in the body? And from there, we can see that a thought comes and a thought goes. And it doesn't have to be something that we sit with longer than necessary, either rehashing things from the past or rehearsing things from the future, but being very present, fully in the moment, in the here and now.
So you said at the beginning to detach the mind and from the thoughts. How do you do that?
So these are the questions that we ask ourselves. It's not a case of detaching mind and thought. It's detaching yourself as a whole being from this one singular thought or experience you're having.
So let's say right now I'm interviewing you. How would that go about if I was to be more mindful about it?
You would ask yourself, well...
I'm asking myself probably what's the next question.
Exactly.
I'm reacting as per what you're saying, and hopefully try to extract as much information that will be very relevant and useful to our viewers.
Yeah.
But then what is more to it then? In terms of colors and shapes, that's a bit eerie to me.
Yeah, so for example, if you're thinking a particular thought, it would vary. So for example, that's the practice that you would have if you're having the space and the time for it. But if you're already engaged in an activity like doing an interview, or let's say you're doing something in terms of teaching, or you're cooking, or you're jogging, whatever it may be, a really great one would be to get back into your body in terms of what we call embodiment and just connecting with your senses. So for example, what can I see right now? What are the colors? What are the hues? What are the textures that are visible to me? Shadow and light. What can I smell around me in the present moment, even as you're jogging, even as you're teaching? What can I hear? How is this making me feel? What is it triggering? So for example, if you're stressed in a moment of teaching and it's the sound of, let's say, children shouting, so the sound becomes something that you focus on and how you're reacting to that sound. So is it anger? Is it frustration? And then asking yourself, well, where is this anger and frustration coming from? And all these minor things that we ask ourselves enable us to get back into the body and to be mindful and present in the moment.
So basically, if you're doing one activity is to focus and keep our thoughts just on that one activity, and try to be aware of how we feel, what are our senses, and what's around us.
Exactly.
Basically, what's in nature.
Yeah.
And does that always work? Because probably in the beginning that will last for 1 or 2 minutes. I think it's with practice that you're able to do it at a lengthier stretch.
Yes, and I think there shouldn't be a pressure that we apply onto ourselves or onto others if we're teaching others about the length of time that you need for meditation or mindfulness. Mindfulness is a form of meditation that can be done, but you can have meditation for visualization and creativity. You can have it for improving memory. You can have it for improving concentration. So the intention that you have behind doing the practice is really what will guide you forward. And you can start off small. You can start off just being mindful. Let's say you can only do it for a minute. A minute is perfectly okay. With practice, you can extend to 2 minutes, to 3 minutes, to 4, 5, and however long. but not to have any forced expectations on yourself, because the moment that we're giving ourselves these expectations and this pressure, we also suddenly feel a little bit stressed
Yes.
or reticent or
Yes.
unwilling to try. But if we have that freedom to go into it with an openness and a curiosity, I think that's something else to mention that's super important, is just being curious about your thoughts, curious about yourself, so that you move beyond this surface layer and surface level understanding towards deeper, more subconscious understanding of yourself.
You mentioned there are different types of techniques to improve memory or to improve other things. So can you share a bit, how do you improve the memory? What technique would you adopt if you want to improve someone's memory?
So, for example, if you want to improve memory, you can have a meditation that is eyes open, observing a scene around you. It's wonderful if people can do this somewhere out in nature where it's relaxing, but it's not necessary. You can really do it when you're, let's say, sitting on the bus on the way home and you're just viewing the scene in front of you on the bus. Or if you can find somewhere just to sit, even if you're having a cup of coffee, you really take in the scene around you, the environment around you. You pay attention to the colors, to the shapes, to where things are positioned and placed. And then afterwards, you can also recall and go back. And if you're someone creative, you can even try to draw it, just a simple sketch. You can write it out and try to remember. And over time, you start building your memory and you start building that capacity to recall and retain information. So that's a simple one that people can do.
What other types of meditations do you teach to people then?
So I teach a variety, and I like to keep
What I'm trying to ask you is, what are the ones that you find the most relevant to people around us in Mauritius?
Yeah. Okay. So the ones that I find most relevant for people and the ones that have received the most positive feedback are really the ones that help people to develop self-awareness, to find that sense of inner tranquility. So a moment to connect with the breath. The breath is always such an excellent starting point for any meditation or mindfulness, because there is nothing that gets you back into your body more than a recognition of your own breathing. And that is a place to start for many of us. Deep breaths in, deep breaths out, just observing how that flows in the body. And for many people, that's been the most useful because it's simple, it's really tangible for them. You can feel the intensity of where your breath enters and exits the body, in the nostrils or in the throat, the mouth. And for many people, this is something that helps them develop greater body awareness, awareness of the sensations they feel, awareness of their posture, awareness of places they may have aches and pains, and how they can breathe into the body and generate and self-regulate that sense of inner tranquility.
Do you recommend people the chanting of mantras, or as a trend which is in Mauritius right now, the Om chanting? Is that something you would recommend to people to do?
I recommend that people take an approach that fits and suits them as an individual.
So how do you find this then?
So, for example, there are methods and ways to teach meditation that revolve around the chanting of mantras or Om chanting, sound chanting, visualizations of energy and so on. But for those who personally don't have an affinity or a particular interest in these approaches or the esoteric nature of these approaches, then there are very simple ways, as I was saying, with the senses, with the breath, with the visual, with the environment that can work for them.
Helina, those 26 minutes just flew by. Is there anything you would like to add before we conclude this interview?
I would just like to add that I think there's so much space for people to really experience meditation in its simplest forms, and how it can be so valuable in our day-to-day living, and how parents and teachers can find very simple ways to integrate it into the classroom or at home. And it can be something that can be done together with the child, and something that helps to create a connection and to help encourage children to develop responsibility and self-regulation.
It will develop also your creativity and
Very much
your
so.
critical thinking and your creativity also.
Very much so. And also to help I think, in many ways, create a society that develops more empathy, more tolerance. If I've got inner peace and I've got a sense of inner tranquility, I think that will also be something I can share with others. And if that knock-on effect keeps happening, that bigger ripple effect, then I believe it can only be positive and for the betterment of the nation as well.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you very much, Helina. Thank you very much for your time and sharing your experience over the years.
Thank you very much.
Welcome, welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, we have now come to the end of this episode of Encounter. I hope you have enjoyed it as much as I have. If you have any queries on the guests or on the topic discussed, drop an email. It's encounter@mbc.itnet.mu. Until the very next program, goodbye.